Irish Influence. If you join us for the first time, welcome, welcome. This is an initiative by Boston College in Irish Studies on campus in Boston and Boston College in Ireland, and beautifully supported, as always, by the Irish Consulate in the good city of Boston. If you have been with us the last few weeks, you know we've had 4 weeks of Dead Male Poets, and it's time to move on from poetry to music. Much more cheerful, much more engaging, and something bizarrely we have not dealt with so far. So, Joe Nugent, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thanks. Lovely to see everybody here, and thank you all. And yes, we moved on to music, and we've got two very special guests here tonight. We're talking to Karan Casey, and we're talking to Brian O'Donovan. Karan is a folk singer and founder member of the Irish supergroup Solas, mostly known for that, I think. And she's a Grammy Award winner. She's been voted Best Irish Female Vocalist not once, but twice. She's a graduate of Long Island University, where she studied jazz, and not satisfied with that, she has a PhD from the University of Limerick. Karan has performed with Peggy Seeger, Liam Clancy, Imelda May, Martin Hayes, Iarla Ó Lionáird, James Taylor, the Boston Pops. It goes on and on and on. Karan is also an activist, and she's helped found a Fair Play, an organisation committed to achieving gender balance and fairness for women in Irish music. And we're going to talk about that along with many other things over the course of the next hour or so. And that brings me to Brian O'Donovan. Brian O'Donovan is from Clonakilty. That's his main claim to fame. Not at all. The Irish Times summed him up by saying that he was the Corkman who brought Madonna, Bowie, U2, and the World Cup to Boston. And that's still just a small part of Brian O'Donovan's contribution to the cultural life of Boston, and especially to the Irish community there. The people of New England know Brian best as the voice of Ireland across the airwaves of WGBH, and very, very particularly to the Celtic Sojourn every Saturday afternoon. And indeed, right now, it was very special virtual St. Patrick's Day Celtic Sojourn that I know that you're organising, Brian. So welcome, both of you. Thanks very much for coming along to us. And you know, I'm going to, if I may, start with Karan. And Karan, I read somewhere that you have an unquenchable, was the term, an unquenchable need to sing. And I suppose that's true, no doubt. I know it must be. Was it always true, I guess, is my question. Was your childhood surrounded by music? Unquenchable. From how early an age?
Yeah, I don't remember not singing, I suppose, would be a way to put it. I was blessed. I suppose typical of the time, a lot of Irish people had parties, and both of my grannies were brilliant singers, and my dad is a great singer, and he performs, you know, he does these kind of poems where he'll go around the room saying a couplet about, you know, a person. Oh, there's Karen over there, she's standing in the corner, I wonder what she'll say today, or whatever. He'd be better, he'd rhyme. And so, you know, the idea of performing was always very much there. We always sang in the car. My mother sang in the house. It wasn't, you know, it was kind of a mixture of it being really normal and natural and quite showy as well. So, yeah.
I love the notion of your father as what sounds to me like an early traditional Irish rap artist going around the room. And that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Brian, I said that you are broadcaster, promoter and everything like that, but you weren't always that. How much was traditional Irish music a part of your background back down there in West Cork? Is Clonakilty West Cork at all, or is it just Cork?
They say actually Clonakilty calls itself the gateway to West Cork, but if you go to Beara Peninsula or somewhere out there, they literally will laugh in your face if you say you're from West Cork. They will say, "Are you kidding me? You guys are near the city or a suburb of the city." They occupy what I refer to as West Cork. But it generally is, we call ourselves the gateway to West Cork. So it kind of starts it really. And when I was growing up, Joe, interestingly, there wasn't a lot of traditional Irish music around at all. We didn't even have a branch of cultus in our town. And I can hardly tell you of any traditional musicians that lived around me. So we were bereft of it, unfortunately. It was one of the areas where a lot of the traditions died out. Thankfully, they didn't when you went further west, even to places like Skibbereen. But it was later that I became aware of traditional music and developed an affinity for it.
And then made it your life almost.
I kind of guess, yeah, just because I felt so strongly about it and still do that I had the opportunity and still do to be just the messenger of this extremely vital and vibrant musical form that we will talk to Karan about. She's one of the great exponents of blending that tradition all the ways to the contemporary, which is really a marked feature of what we call traditional Irish music.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you come, Karan, we're talking about places here. You come from Waterford. Waterford isn't exactly County Clare, is it? Is there a tradition there?
Well, yeah, I mean, when I say we sang, you know, Lay Your Blanket on the Ground, The Old Bog Road, Danny Boy. Then as I got older, Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, you know, Aretha. It was anything goes in our house. In terms of traditional music, I was particularly fortunate that a woman, Winifred Foran, was my teacher in school, and she was an incredible woman. She has 10 children, taught all the way through all, you know, her pregnancies. Used to go for a 5-mile walk every morning and grew every flower and fruit that there is going, and took it upon herself to kind of teach the group of Ceol. So she would bring us to her house and say, oh, transcribe that song there. Actually, Clannad was one of the first tapes she played for us. And she basically taught us songs and then would say, okay, now you're going to the competition next week and organise it. And then when I was 9 or 10, she said, okay, Karen, you can go into the solo singing. So, you know, we just basically did what Miss Foran said. She has a way about her. She's amazing.
As they do.
Yeah.
Karen, can I jump in here for just a second?
Low?
Yeah, a little bit low. If you brought the
Sorry.
microphone right
Okay,
close
yeah.
to you, I think that would be great.
Is that better?
Much better for everybody, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Can
Thanks
you hear me
very
now?
much, Brian. It's great
Yeah.
to have a professional here directing us by incompetence here.
I'm a mic mover of a professional stock from way back. But just if you speak right into it, Karen, that's great. But what Karen said there, guys, is really true, is that and I think it's one of the strengths of Irish music. There's a term in the Irish language called omos den auran, which is basically respect for the song. And essentially that kind of guides a lot of traditional music. And I think what a lot of us grew up with, and one of the things I love about it, and you heard Karen saying it, is that you could have a session going on in Ireland where somebody's singing a sean-nós song in Gaelic, one of the great Gaelic songs from Munster, for example. And then the next song will be a Johnny Cash song. And there's really no difference in the audience receptivity to the song or the singer's presentation of the song. And I think that's a huge strength of the tradition.
Yeah.
You agree, Karen?
Oh, totally. And I think it's really helps, you know, the idea of the tradition really is that the music recreates itself, you know, like if you're in a singing session, people will react if you improvise or do something that's your own, you know, you've your own gimp on the song and you shape it your own way. I mean, obviously there's always like the touchstones of traditional song, or who you get the songs from and the different versions, but really what you're aiming towards is making it your own. And then to help that, or you know, drive that process along, a lot of people have been influenced by other musics, you know, and I think that's really enhanced traditional singing. You know, I think people living in Dublin 200 years ago, we don't know, so it's all conjecture, but they would have had people coming in and singing new songs, and so they would have swapped them, or Irish people going abroad and bringing them back. To me, that's a very beautiful thing about it.
Now, one thing,
And I
So there
think,
was-
sorry, that one thing, Karen, you were just talking about the kind of the role in your life of the school teacher who made you do it encouraged, got you into the competitions. I mean, also, I remember a few years ago, I went to the score finals up in Castlebar, or wherever they were. And I mean, the talent of these 12, 13-year-olds terrified me. I mean, it's just brilliant. But I mean, clearly, be that family, be it through the GA, be it through music classes, they had learned to perform, they owned their stage. Listening to them talk, they knew the traditions you're talking about. Do you think that's still as strong now in the 21st century as going back a few decades?
Oh yeah, I think the schools are coming down with kids learning instruments. If you go to Willie Week, I mean, it's just massive, the amount of children learning traditional instruments. I do think the singing is a little bit tougher. I think it's finding it harder, really, you know, because it's hard to find a space to sing even nowadays. You know, even if you go to a pub and you have a singing session, you have to turn off all the televisions or turn off the radio or whatever. But there's loads of in saying that, there are loads of singing weekends that go on all the time. The Goleen in Dublin is fantastic. The Cork Singers Club in Ishone, Curry, you know, there's loads. So, I definitely feel a lot of the kids, are. I was teaching out in Douglas about 4 or 5 years ago, and there was 400 kids in the school on Wednesday evenings, and people, a waiting list of nearly 100 trying to get in. So yeah, it's really thriving. It's great.
And it's that part of kind of culture and heritage. Does that still apply, Brian, in the diaspora in Irish America, that kids are sitting there thinking about traditional music, thinking about learning the fiddle? I mean, I know our students, I mean, a number of them who arrive here with thick Boston accents, with the Red Sox jersey, but have travelled with their instrument that they, you know, they're Irish and they've picked up somewhere along the way. So
very, very much so. I think Karen would have experienced that as well here in all of the years traveling back. Of course, she lived in New York for those many years, but you're looking at obviously much smaller numbers, and it's ethnically connected, though not exclusively so. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But the instrumentalists and indeed some of the singers who would describe themselves as Irish traditional musicians or Scottish, you know, this kind of term that we use as a kind of Celtic music, which is a kind of a useful term to describe this whole umbrella. But some of those musicians are absolutely stunning, and they, you know, blend in and sometimes exceed, especially in the competitive atmosphere there, the qualities and the chops, if you will, of many Irish-born musicians. So that's a very, very healthy sign of something that's going on. And it's not because it's not because like they want to wear the flag, the green flag on their collars or anything like that. It's not a sense of Irish pride. It's just because the music is great and they enjoy playing it. And of course, Irish traditional music and session music in that folk world is a universal language. You can travel to any country in the world, any city in the world, and if you've got a basic repertoire of tunes, you can go in, sit down, and you suddenly have community around you. And that's a pretty powerful thing, especially these days. So there are lots of musicians here, Karen, and you know them, guys like Joey Abarta, for example, who's going to be with us coming up in St. Patrick's Day Celtic Sojourn. He lives in the Boston area and is regarded as one of the finest uilleann pipers in the world. But I don't think he's got any Irish in him whatsoever. He's Joey Abarta from California, from Southern California, who spotted Riverdance on in a television sometime and suddenly became dedicated to the uilleann pipe. So there are many, many stories like that. They're very uplifting and very encouraging to people like Karen and myself involved in music.
Music as a universal language, and even traditional Irish music as an almost universal language. It's a really wonderful thought for us here. And may I just remind people that you're extremely welcome to put any questions or doubts or whatever you have, just put them into the question and answer there, or put them into the chat here, and we'll come to them gradually as we go along. this might be a question, Karen, Brian, that may seem a little bit naive. It is, because how little I know about music. But we were talking there about the various strains from different parts of the country. So there was the music of County Clare and of Wexford, and there was music of Donegal and whatever else. Is there any danger of an homogenization over the last few years? Or is that constant hybridization happening from outside? Is that a very silly question? I suppose I'm thinking about the way that it bothers me a little bit, that as I travel around Ireland, that I see that some of the accents seem to be flattening. So that somebody said that Cavan is one of the last ones that's still retaining its solidity there. But as we're losing those things, does that translate into music, or am I being totally silly with that?
Yeah, I think you're right. It probably has been diluted a bit. I still think, you know, you can still find regional styles okay, but really, I think that's longer than the last few years. It's decades.
Right.
I think, you know, and even with just people listening to the radio and hearing, oh, I like that song from County Down, I learn it. And you might put in your own local name or place, but definitely, I would be an example of somebody like that, actually, who has taken songs from a lot of different places. I'm
not quite sure whether that's a strength or a weakness. Do you have any comment upon that, Brian, or am I going anywhere with that question?
No, it's a totally legitimate question, and it's true. And the accent, quite frankly, the way of speaking is a perfect metaphor for it, Joe. Is that this flattening that's going on around the world? Basically, English is becoming such a dominant language, and these nuances and these colloquials are just not as strong as they once were. In traditional Irish music, that is definitely true. There was once a time, if you came from Cork, you would play in a Cork style. If you came from Donegal, you'd play in a Donegal style. Now, that is largely still the case, largely because of the teachers that are passing it down. But the difference is that the Donegal player would be much more familiar with tunes and repertoire and styles of West Cork than they would have been 50 years ago, just purely, as Karen was saying, because of exposure and the fact that they're traveling more. But they would be also, they're kind of, I think especially in a lot of serious traditional musicians, they adopt a style, almost like they would in classical music. They would adopt an approach, and indeed the repertoire is still there. If you're from Munster, Westminster, Clare and Cork and Kerry, you're going to have more, for example, polkas and slides, a particular way of acted gigs, for example, are going to be in your repertoire. If you're in Donegal, you're going to have tunes in your repertoire that nobody would have heard of, mazurkas and things called highlands, which would have come across from Scotland. So to a certain extent, that's still there, but the flattening that you talk about is occurring because of the universal access to media and recordings.
Are we losing that in song as well then, Brian? I mean, in terms of if somebody's from West Donegal or West Clare, you know, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, they would have sung about place. They would have sung about that kind of, it's that oral tradition that came through. If now we're in a world where, you know, you look at social media, it's great. I mean, Nationwide did a program a few weeks ago about the kids who are dancing in the Connemara Gaeltacht, and that's being passed on to youngsters who are doing Irish dancing or Sean-Nós dancing out in the States. So at one level, you've got the global sparks that spread this thing, but also are we losing the local?
In songs, I think Karen would be able to talk about that. And yes, but again, you've got people that are conscious of it. So they're keeping that tradition up and passing it on and actually making a conscious effort to learn it, Karen. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah, I think if you can have both. I think and we're secure enough, I think, at this point in ourselves to know that the tradition is there and indeed is heavily documented now and kept, stored. So if you want to go to someone who will teach you, you know, the Clare style or just Waterford songs, you can seek those out. And then if you want somebody who can broaden that out a bit, you can get that too. So I think it's, you know, it's good that it works both ways.
It is really the best of both worlds, but I think Karen said something there that's very important. It's the sense of self-security and the confidence in your own tradition. this is not Irish traditional music is not a static thing. It's not archival. It's not to be pulled out of a drawer and say, oh, look, more a bhíochaun fado, as it was long ago. It's not like that, because it is now. It's a living, breathing, changing thing. And it goes back to what we started the conversation with almost an hour on, is that you can sing a traditional Irish song and an Emmylou Harris song and a Paddy Griffin song, which Karen recorded a beautiful version of in her most recent album. And it's just there. It's not, you don't call attention to it. You don't say, here's the traditional song and here's the Paddy Griffin song. It doesn't matter. They're both songs and they both express an emotion. And it's the confidence, when you're that confident in your tradition, you can stretch it out and still come back to the nest very easily and frequently.
And that point about being static, one thing just to remind everybody, as Joe did at the beginning, if you've got any questions, do pop them up. But just one thing on that idea of it not being static, Brian, but obviously we've been locked in a world for a year which is bizarrely static. A question's come in from Jason. Wonderful chat, everyone. I wonder how much the pandemic has affected the deeply social nature of music making in Ireland today. And how quickly do the panelists think the scene will recover after everyone's vaccinated?
Yeah, I mean, it has been horrendous. It has to be said, you know, the thing about making music is meeting people that you like and connecting with them and singing and playing with them, saying hello, you know, having a pint, or if it's a gig or festivals, it's brilliant when you can meet up with people. So that obviously has been it's non-existent. And I'm sure, I think we'll all go back to having sessions and singing and
go back as quickly and with as much enthusiasm as we can muster.
And maybe not taking it.
Open, we'll be back there, won't we, Karen? Absolutely.
Yeah.
The
And
first
not
session
taking
to end
it
all
for
sessions.
granted. And not taking that for granted. And maybe we'll even be more, you know, appreciative for the first night.
and for many more afterwards.
No,
but
I
Brian
believe,
has to deal with that very particularly. Sorry, Brian. Carry on.
Yeah, no, you're right, Joe. Is that you know, I think what Karen said is true, that we will. I think one of the benefits of this pandemic is that it's going to require, or has required us to kind of take everything not for granted anymore. And I think every single moment after this is over, like little things, I just think of little things, what I would give to be sitting having a pint, Joe, with you, as we've done at the wonderful neighborhood bar here called the Irish Village. And we just took that for granted. It was just a Friday night, you'd have a pint. But now it would be like, oh my goodness, this would be the best thing that you could possibly imagine happening. And I think that's going to be true about music, getting together with people. And I think once people have the confidence that they will be back. You know, we did something recently, Karen, for a Christmas Celtic Sojourn. Make a long story short, we created a quarantine bubble because we needed to get artists to come together. And we did so in a very, very careful way. It took a long period of time, testing and everything else. But my point is, and I'll jump right to it, is once the group of us, 10 of us, had the idea that we were safe in this bubble, and we were, then everything came back very, very quickly. Hugging, you know, having dinners together, stuff that we think is impossible. And we forgot that there was a danger in other people very, very quickly. That gives me confidence, as once you think that the other person isn't putting you in danger or you're putting them in danger, we are designed as human beings to be together, close together, with that great sense of touch.
Absolutely, and indeed, I'm not going to go off the point at all here, but just when you use that last phrase with that great sense of touch, I just have to mention, of course, our colleague at Boston College and a friend, I think, of yours too, Brian, Richard Carney, one of the great philosophers.
Just got the book.
You just got the book. That's absolutely right. You should all just get the book. He was on that Corkman's program on the radio last Sunday, and it was gorgeous to hear him. The sense of touch and how we're losing that, and how much we're going to touch once we get out there. Life is going to be so much more flavorful as soon as we get out. I want to just continue to something. We were talking about regionalism and different contributions from different parts of Ireland to Irish music as we know today. But I just want to talk about the contribution of America to Irish music, because I think we're very proud over here. We'd like to think that we contributed so much to culture life of America with our music and everything else. but that flows backwards also. And maybe we can ask this on the broader scale from Brian and on the particular scale from yourself, Karen. How did America, what did we bring back from America to enrich Irish music? Can I ask Brian to start with that first, and then we will go down to the particular with you, Karen, if I may, because you have been in America and that,
Well, I'm going to throw it very quickly to Karen because I think she's a prime example of that, in actual fact, of somebody who comes here from Ireland, steeped in, I mean, Karen's tradition was as much jazz and contemporary music as it was traditional music, but comes here with that broadness and then takes the American experience, which is very, very distinctive, especially in the era that Karen was in New York and the foundation of the supergroup Solas, which she was very much involved in, and then taking all of that back to Ireland, Karen. You're a prime example of the transatlantic influences going back and forth.
Yeah, definitely. I came over, I went over to America on the Morrison visa. I was very lucky to get one.
This is the early 90s.
92, 93, before obviously the whole Celtic Tiger thing, the unemployment was pretty bad. And I suppose even things like Johnny, I Hardly Knew Ya, Black is the Colour, Nina Simone's version, the Shularoon, which became, what's it called?
Johnny's Gone for a Soldier.
Thank you. And all those songs that travelled to America and then became different in America and then travelled back again. Black is the Colour is a particular example. The Nina Simone version, and the Christy Moore version. So there's this constant conversation back and forward and people connecting through the song. I mean, it goes back years, not just the past few years. And I suppose for myself, I would still am a huge jazz fan. So while I would have taken, some improvisational ideas or I suppose it comes across more in sound, I think, in vocal sound, than in actual arrangements. I think it's, in a way, it might seem bizarre, but through the voice, with a synthesis of different musics, it's perhaps easier to meld those different identities. I think if you have an instrument, an arrangement that is very set in the jazz with chords, it switches it into a set arena. It can be a little bit more blended within vocal technique.
Right.
So I suppose, I definitely, as Brian said, I that's what I kind of did. I didn't think about it. I didn't set out to do any of that. But when you look back on what you've done and seen how different musics have influenced you, then you see it or hear it.
And again, to answer that a little bit more, specifically, America is a very, very important influence in Ireland for a whole variety of reasons, but you can even identify it as the practical influence in traditional music. If you just think about one thing, there were fiddlers that came to America. Michael Coleman is probably the most famous of them, but there were many others. And they suddenly were brought into studios to record for the huge diaspora, for a teeming population, just purely from a commercial standpoint. The idea was that, look, if there's this huge population here, we're going to record this guy doing a few tunes, and then we're going to make money selling the 78s or the cylinders that they were back then. When those cylinders were transported back to Ireland, the Irish then said, whoa, our kind of honky-tonk country music that we're playing in barns and wherever we can must be must be good. It must have a value to it. So in some ways, the commercialization of it in America, exported back to Ireland, created the foundation for the Ireland to have more respect for their own music. And this happened even 60 years later with the Clancy brothers singing the old songs. I remember my own father, Karen, and my uncle watching the Clancy brothers on television in Ireland, kind of nudging each other and going, look, they're singing, you know, the Wild Colonial Boy or the Rising of the Moon, songs that we sang that we thought were kind of throwaway rural songs. Suddenly they're singing them in Carnegie Hall. We must have something that's precious. And I think that in a very real way became the respect for our traditional music that you see today.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, that happens.
Capital of Irish music. They're just increasing. They simply because of the association with America, whatever else. I'm sorry. I just want just one question. And I know Mike's got something here to ask as well. And I want to just talk about a particular influence that I know has been on you, Karen, and I think on Irish music in general. And I'm speaking of the region that is Dublin, and I'm thinking very particularly of Frank Hart. And I don't know how familiar everybody out there will be with Frank Hart and with him as a great archive of music and as a great proponent of a particular form of singing and that. But would you like to say something about what Frank Hart meant to you, Karen? Or maybe even tell the people out there actually who Frank Hart was? Maybe not everybody knows that.
Yeah. Well, Frank was a collector and of songs and a great singer. He was also an architect who taught for years in Kevin Street. But he devoted his life really to collecting songs. He went with a tape recorder everywhere. He lived in America as well for a couple of years and taped a lot of songs there. And he lived in England and taped a lot of songs and travelled to England to collect songs. So he had a huge collection of songs. And I think he kind of had, he must have had some sort of photographic memory. I mean, he was like, to me, he was like a magic person. When I met him, I was 25 in the Catskills in New York, and he was teaching and I was teaching, and I had about 10 songs and he had about 24,000. And he was very kind, you know, he kind of could see that I was very interested. And he basically kind of just said, look, I'll give you songs. And he did. And he changed my life. He changed the course of my life. He gave me so much time. I would go and tape him, you know, with my cassette and mini disc. And we would talk about songs, and, you know, we'd walk around. He lived on the Liffey, actually, and he used to feed like a kingfisher, and the swans used to come up off the river into his backyard, and he just sang. He sang all day. I mean, it was kind of even embarrassing if we'd be in the shop in Spar and he'd be singing away and I'd be like, Frank. And he was amazing. He was great crack as well. He was funny and very irreverent.
And I don't know if you can see this, but this is I think it's in reverse there, but it's a huge volume of Frank Hart's music that was song that was created by Terry Moylan. And if you don't have this, you don't have the definitive collection, because what Karen is saying is Frank was an amazing guy, but he had an absolute fascination for songs, and he would not alone get one song, but he'd get every version of that song that was known, going back to your regional styles or in any part of the world, and he would sing it. And he by his own admission, he didn't have the most sweetest of voices at all. Actually, he was very dub, you know. He'd sing like that, and it was kind of rough, but man, did he put emotion into it. And was he a storer of songs, and as Karen said, an unbelievable sharer of songs. He was like just a bank deposit or a Smithsonian of Irish traditional songs, essentially.
And would you, Brian, just actually share with us once more actually the name of that collection that you have there, just so that the people out here can see what it is and look for it?
It's called A Living Voice, and it's the Frank Hart song collection, A Living Voice, and it's just a big collection. It just came out last year, actually. Terry Moylan is a great guy himself, and put it together. Everybody who knows Frank is so happy that he did that, and I think Karen is right, and all singers out there and people like me, in just really pay tribute to Frank Hart every time we think of singing.
Brilliant.
And I suppose the brilliant thing that he also did, which was really interesting to me, was Frank's CDs. I don't know if you can see them, they're there. But in this book, what they've done really well is Frank loved the history behind all the songs, and he loved Irish history. I love Irish history as well. And he would really research where the song was from. And then that's partly why his obsession with getting the different versions. And then he would weave into while I say, he used to sort of say that he wasn't a professional singer, so then he wasn't under any obligation to sing a certain type of song or be commercial, that he could sing what he wanted. But in fairness, he made 7 albums on, with record companies, and he was revered.
And great musicians as well working with him who love to work with him. They're beautiful albums, actually.
Yeah.
All of them.
But the store of knowledge in the lore, in the backstory, is really extraordinary, and he would put poems in and pamphlets, and I think actually his obsession with the historical truth within those songs is really his legacy.
That's something, it's always something that strikes me when you talk to traditional musicians. Obviously in BC we had our own wonderful Seamus Connolly for years, but this idea of the collector, and then so many performers do go and learn the backstory. As you say, they don't just pitch up and say, right, these are the top 5 hits that the crowd love. They're spending all that time talking within that community. The people like Frank you mentioned who are collecting, but you've got that tipping point. I mean, Brian, you mentioned it about kind of songs being recorded for the first time in the 20s and 30s, just after sheet music in the States. They're laid down. But I mean, that whole idea, probably in the second half of the 20th century, you have essentially what is a musical oral tradition, which has traversed the country, traversed the routes the diaspora went. But that ability to actually keep those core people collecting them, is that what actually makes the heart of traditional music? The fact you have got those decades, if not centuries, of stories, styles, etc., all standing behind you, or you stand on top of?
Well, I think that's a very good point. I mean, to address the collections, the physical collections to begin with, this is a tradition and a reality that went back to the 1700s, and it is said that if Bunting hadn't collected some of the harp tunes in the Belfast Harp Festival, that a lot of them would have been lost, and they would have been lost. But most of it is an oral tradition, passed from literally from mouth to ear of generations, and that's the richness of the songs changing. But Frank, as Karen points out, Frank was also intensely aware of the social documentary that was going on in these songs. What was his famous statement? Robbie O'Connell wrote a great song on it, Karen. He said, those in power.
Give it. I have it here actually, and it comes from Guy Biner, and of course Guy is an archive himself of so much information. Should have expected with those in power write history, those who suffer write the songs.
And that really was Frank's kind of mantra, and that's why he took the songs not just as kind of distracting entertainment of a Friday or Saturday night. He took them as important messages, perhaps from different eras, and he didn't overdo it. He wasn't over serious about that, Karen. He loved songs, and he was very playful with the songs, but he realized that they were something and vehicles really full of messages that transcended the current culture, whatever that was, and that gave them a power beyond generations.
Absolutely.
And an emotional power.
An emotional power.
They're the stories of people's feelings which are important, you know, and what people went through. And I think in looking back at history, that's, you know, it's not just statistics and numbers and years. It's important for people to know what happened and why. And so as we either repeat the good things or don't do the bad things again.
That's a lovely point, Karen. History perhaps tells us what's happened. I'm being very reductionist here, but maybe literature, and I'm going to say songs, tell us how people feel about what happened. And of course, that's a grander way for us to understand the past. Now, you know, actually, we're going to ask you to sing, Karen, and we were going to wait actually until we finish. But maybe you would give us a song here now, and then we're going to move on to perhaps the second element of what we're speaking about here. We've talked a lot about transatlanticism and that, but I particularly want to address questions of the kind of ideological purpose of song, and I don't want to make that sound too grand, and also just about its function in the world, those kind of questions. And we'll come back to those after a little while. But maybe you give us a song first, Karen. Is there something that you have in mind first?
Yeah, okay. I want to do one that I wrote for the centenary, the 1916 commemorations. I was asked to go up to Liberty Hall to sing, and I had begun reading about them. I actually found out that my great-grandfather, Peggy Ryan of the hotel in Doon and Limerick, was in the East Limerick Brigade. And I was asked actually to go and sing for an unveiling of the plaque for him in Doon. And I couldn't go, I was in America. But I just started reading the family history and found out about my great-grandmother called Agnes O'Dwyer, that she was in Common Amon. And I kind of just became quite obsessed with reading about the period. And I started reading about many of the women. And two of the women I discovered were Julia Grennan, who was the nurse who stayed with Connolly in GPO, and then the love of her life was Elizabeth O'Farrell, who went out to surrender the flag with Pierce. And I hadn't heard of Julia or Elizabeth. So I wrote this song. Actually, it was Theo Dorgan. I was working with Theo, and Theo said to me, I wonder what Julia felt as Elizabeth was going out to surrender the flag. So this is to kind of try and conjure that up. It's called Down in the Glen. Okay. There's the lore, the backstory. Okay. I will meet you down in the glen, my love, deep down in the glen, my love. The sunlight, it will fall, it will fall down at your feet when we meet, my love. And I'll sing a rebel song for you, all the rebel songs for you. I'll sing them loud, I'll sing them proud, sing them long and sing them strong, all night long, my love. I know you will appear as the evening shadows fade down in the west, my love. I know you'll take my hand, and to my lips you press the kiss I love the best in all the land. And I'll sing a rebel song for you, all the rebel songs for you. I'll sing them loud, I'll sing them proud, sing them long and sing them strong, all night long, my love. I know you must away before the end of day. For your rebel heart you must depart. I'll put all the stars out there for to dress your lovely hair, and the moon will be the host of the air. And I'll sing a rebel song for you, all rebel songs for you. I'll sing them loud, I'll sing them proud, sing them long and sing them strong, all night long, till all the women are free, just like you and me, my love. And they're like a pin in your hair, the dark sings softly to the moon.
Well, look, if we any doubts about how music can move us, that certainly has a record. That's absolutely gorgeous, Karen. And as I hear that, of course, we hear echoes of that very wonderful Irish rebel song that was Down by the Glenside, where I met an old woman, says I first saw her come and glory old to the bold fiend. And I just want to ask a question, and I put it to Brian first and then come to you, Karen, in fact, and it's about the power of music, the ideological power of music. You know, it seems to me that it's not that long ago when we expected that folk music would change things. At least in the States, we had people like Bob Dylan and we had Joni Mitchell and Joan Baez who we thought could transform the world, or Luke Kelly, maybe in Ireland. Are those times over? Or were they ever there? Can music change the world? I mean, can folk music do what, at least in the 60s, we thought it could do? Any thoughts on that one?
Well, I would jump on that song immediately, that whether it can change the world, it certainly reflects the changes of the world, you know. And again, I think that's what Frank would have said. It's a reflection of the realities that are going on around it. I mean, Karen just wrote a song and sang it, an emotional representation that could not have happened 50 years ago. You're talking about a gay relationship. You're talking about women who were literally erased from history, right, Karen? Like they were actually literally, the participants in 1916, a lot of the women were literally taken out of photographs. Now, they didn't have Photoshop back then, so you can imagine the effort that they went into to do that. And they were forgotten about in terms of their relationships, in terms of their feelings. And so there was a lot of not lack of, absence of, or if there's a kind of a negative to that, kind of exclusion from history. So there is music redressing that in a traditional form, telling a simple story of love and alarm and stress and fear for a loved one in the context of Irish history. So, Karen.
Wonderful, Brian. That's marvelous, reflecting and authenticating the thing. Karen, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I'm going to react as a singer, of course, and say that, of course, the songs can, well, certainly, you know, for me, obviously, you know, when you're singing a song, one of the beautiful things about singing is singing together, you know, and if you sing the chorus and you develop this sort of communal area that we can talk about, maybe not always difficult. I mean, they're joyous as well, and all the feelings, the whole spectrum of emotions are treated. But, you know, you can put into the room almost, you know, give to the room this notion, well, what about this issue? What about the thorny subject of song, of colonialism, let's say? And a lot of the traditional songs are, in terms of history, are about colonialism. But can the people in the room come together then around this issue? Does that, does it help? I mean, I think that political agency is brought into a room with song. And I think people, not everyone, not everybody feels this, and that's fine, and not everybody does it, and that's fine too. But I think people get a lot from it. I mean, I was with Frank Hart in the Barbican in 2003, I think it was. And of course, I was there with my tape recorder, diligently taping him. And he was giving a talk on revolutionary songs, rebel songs, really. And this man in the room said, a very sort of nice English gentleman said, but I mean, why is it that you Irish have all these, very sad songs? And Frank paused and everybody was like, Jesus. And there was 400 people in the room. And Frank said, well, probably because of you lot. And then this amazing conversation ensued where people talked. And what we couldn't have talked about earlier had been brought forward with the song. So that was for me, I was like, Jesus, what's going on here? So I think a lot of community can be built. A lot of love in the room can be built. Now, it's not always, some people, they hear a lambag drum, or people from that tradition hear traditional music and they don't feel that it brings them together. So it's not always the case. So I think we need to be honest about that. But I definitely feel that the songs, for me anyway, are a possibility of change. I think all art is about that possibility and movement, and moving people into somebody's different way of looking at someone else's life. That happened to me when I heard Nina Simone songs when I went to America. And I heard Mississippi Goddamn and had never heard about Mississippi, or, many of her songs, For Women, all of them, Young, Gifted and Black. And that directed me to a narrative in American history that wasn't obvious to Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston, other people and other directions. So it opened up a whole world, and it kind of opens up pathways of other people's lives.
Wonderful. Very nicely put, absolutely, indeed. And
sorry, can I ask a question, Joe? Yeah, it's just that thing that, again, about Joe's question about kind of radicalism and activism. I mean, does some of this go back to people, a good friend of mine in Mullingar watching, Tom Hunt, sort of very knowledgeable about music. He sort of said, the important thing about something like the Clancy's, Brian, when you mentioned earlier that obviously they're there on TV, they're in Carnegie Hall, but also it's the impact they're having on people like Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That it's somebody, somebody might look at Clancy in his Aaron jumper and think that's not a political radical, yet Dylan, who does become almost a poster child of 60s folk singing radicalism, is taking it from Clancy.
And Dylan did a lot of adoption of that from what Karen was saying, black music as well. Dylan took a lot of those songs of pain, and made them their own. The term I used earlier on is actually a quote from Dylan, where he says, he was asked what folk music is, and he said it's anything that transcends the current culture. And largely what Dylan did is he recognized very quickly in Greenwich Village during the late 50s and 60s that there was something going on there that deserved to be looked at, and where he got a lot of his inspirations from. Now, Dylan very specifically said he was never a political singer. He actually denied ever being a political singer, and eschewed that designation. He said, look, I just sing the songs. You decide whether they're political or not. And different singers have different approaches to that very question. Karan knows that, like in our last 4 years here, singers have had a very, very difficult time with this, because they're traveling around this country and they're singing and saying things about songs and about their honest feelings about songs and how they reflect the current situation that's going on, and against an administration like the last 4 years. This was not easy, Karan, right? This is a tough subject for you, even on stage. And talk a little bit about that, because I think it's really, really interesting in the context of the music that you bring.
Yeah, I mean, so it's fascinating. You know, you could do 20 songs in a night. They could all be love songs, the majority of them, and they could mostly be even about Irish history. But if you sang, like I in the Iraq War, I sang against the Iraq War, but I would sing one song. Usually it was the King's Shilling, and people would get so cross and irate and be up at the CD desk going, what are you doing? And you shouldn't be over here telling us what to do. And you need to go back and figure out the problems between the Catholics and the Protestants. So I did that. And then, you know, it's...
And as you said, that's one of 20 songs. One.
And it's often if you speak about it, actually.
Yeah.
If you make a political point and point out the politics in the song, often you can sing the song and people be singing along and not even considering it to be a political song. So yes, it is. It can be difficult. Yeah.
And dangerous, you know. And you're putting yourself out there. You know, I'll take just a little anecdote. Is that, you know, I do a Christmas Celtic Sojourn, and at one stage, you know, regularly I would say something like, and especially in the years 2017 and 18, I would regularly say, you know, and this is, here we are all on stage, because we were the type of show that we were doing, and I'd say, here we are a nation of immigrants, right? And then the audience would, go, look, here we are, a nation of immigrants. We were an immigrant show. I would regularly get 3 or 4 emails saying, I want a full refund. I left the theater with my family. You are so offensive. Why did you get so political? And why do you hate our current administration? Right. And I do not exaggerate in that. I could show you the emails of it. So the sensitivity of music and how it can go in either direction, Karan, as you point out, you know, you never know what's going to happen, but you do know that putting yourself out there is risky.
And if they did tell you, Karan, to go back to Ireland to start fixing things here, in a way, you in fact actually did that. And there was a movement called Fair Play, which had to do with the position of Irish music, women in Irish music. And before I hear about that, I just want to ask a quick question to Brian, if it's that possible, Brian, I'm so sorry. And that is actually, I would have thought, in fact, that women were always prominent in Irish music, that we had those great names that we know, Kitty Hayes and Mrs. Crotty, and I'm going to mention Kathleen Mullally because we're on a Mullingar thing here tonight and whatever else, but women were always doing something. Is that the case? What's the historical context here?
I think the historical context is where the women were very much a part of it, of course, in as much as they possibly could be, and carrying on traditions and everything else, and they're seen as that right now. I think Fair Play is a kind of a little bit of a different take on it, and and Karan is going to explain it much more than I did, because she started this organization which we fully support and so many people support, to redress essentially the misogyny that exists in our society across the board. It wasn't unique to Irish traditional music, it wasn't unique to jazz, classical music, arts generally across the board, sports. Look, it's societal problems, and I think what Karan has done with Fair Play is she's just gotten everybody involved in it to think a little bit, to give it some consideration, the issue of how you think about women you know, Karen, and I'm going to leave it up to you, but when people would call up my own daughters in a band, and they would call up and they say, we already have a chick band on the Bluegrass Festival. They would already say, we already have that covered. You fit into that category. So Karen, I think across the board there's enough to be talked about there in fair play.
Yeah, I mean that's really it. I think it's obviously was in the ether, you know, with the Me Too movement. There was Waking the Feminists here in Ireland. People had spoken up about the lack of women, not playwrights in the Abbey, actually particularly for the centenary celebrations. And so a lot of women were talking backstage, and we began talking and sort of kind of reframing what our experiences and going, well, actually, yes. And now, you know, I'm speaking as somebody of privilege, it has to be said, you know, I have had an extraordinarily privileged life singing the songs that I want to sing. But I definitely was constantly in environments where it was mostly men and just me. Right. And I would have to say and admit of my own making, often being the singer with an all-male band. So fair play wasn't about, you know, coming out and giving out to everyone, as somebody said to me. It was about raising awareness about gender balance and fairness, and also women in other areas of music that aren't traditionally seen as female, particularly sound and recording. Right. I'd never been, for instance, recorded by anybody, any female, like any recording. Right. It did turn, as a lot of stories came in, to sexual harassment and assault, which was very difficult. And we constantly advise people, if anything has happened, that's not your fault, and to go to the guards or PSNI or the rape crisis centres. So, you know, it has been an incredible life-changing experience for myself. You know, I have talked and campaigned with many women and men. We have a lot of male allies, and I think that's really important, who are helping us and helping the conversation along. And there's tremendous camaraderie in that. But it has been difficult hearing the stories. And of course, in Ireland, we are good at not listening to testimonies from women, you know, even with the mother and baby homes. It's very much an issue that happens a lot of the time. So we're winding down the campaign because there's a broader campaign evolving where all of the arts are coming together to campaign for change. But it is, like Brian is saying, that it's obviously it's a societal issue, and it would be ridiculous to say that it doesn't exist in traditional music, which people were trying to say. You know, the sanctity of the traditional music couldn't be questioned. That was difficult, but people have, in fairness, I think, really come around and been very supportive. A lot of the institutions and a lot of the people who teach music in particular have really been very supportive. So, you know, it's mixed. There's some good things, really great things.
And it's lovely to hear that voices are being raised, actually, and they're the voices that are being, that are part of a whole community thing. And I think it's one of the themes we've had this evening is the power of music actually to move people, and that it's taking on these great issues actually, and it is becoming part of that discussion with the power of music is really wonderful to hear. Listen, I'm afraid that we've just about gone past our time. Mike, is there anything finally that you want to say there? Do you want to throw in something, please? And maybe
I'll just throw in next week if I can. Yeah. I know we're going to go back to Karen before we all go, so don't go anywhere, people. But just next week, just so we've got that up. Next week we have the wonderful Sarah Townsend, who about Irishness and race and the new Irish. And what she's actually working on and kind of has a big conversation about is how the Irish in the 20th and 21st century have addressed and thought about those questions. But particularly what she's interested in is how the big cities like Chicago, Boston, etc., dealt with those similar kind of mobility questions back in the post-Second World War era. So it's going to be really interesting to hear yet another one of these kind of transatlantic conversations. And then in the bottom left corner, Lenny Abrahams, etc., follow up after that.
Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. But we're not finished at all, because we're going to have one more song actually from Karen. And you can't possibly better what you did before. It was so absolutely moving. What are you going to sing for us now, please? Can she? Yes.
Always does.
It's great to see you all, and especially yourself, Brian.
Great to see you, Karen. We can't wait to have you back with us.
Thank you. And love to Lindsay.
I will.
Okay, I was going to do a song written by Janisine. Okay. See these lines upon my face, they're a map of where I've been. In the deep they are traced, a deeper life has settled in. How do we survive, living out our lives? And I wouldn't trade a line, make it smooth and fine, or pretend that time stands still. I want to rest my soul here where it can grow without fear. Another line, another year, I'm still standing here. See these marks upon my skin, they're the lyric of my life. Every story just begins, means another ends in sight. Only lovers understand. Skin just covers who I am, and I wouldn't trade a line, make it smooth and fine, or pretend that time stands still. I want to rest my soul here where it can grow without fear. Another line, another year, I'm still standing here. See these bruises, see these scars, hieroglyphs that tell the tale. You can read them in the dark, through your fingertips like braille. Oh, and I wouldn't trade a line, make it smooth and fine, or pretend that time stands still. I want to rest my soul here where it can grow without fear. Another line, another year, I'm still standing here. I'm still standing here. I'm still standing here.
Absolutely beautiful, Karen.
Thank you.
So awfully much.
You.
Gurmil Malgutsa agus Gakin and Shogus, just to say that Brian Fresh, and actually there's you put up a link there on YouTube.
That was actually, yeah, I wanted to say that the somebody asked Joe, the Vimeo link is a mistake actually. I'm doing too much as I'm listening to Janisine and Karen. But the other one it's called Down in the Glen. It's from hieroglyphics that tell the tale, isn't it, Karen? That Down in the Glen. So that's one of the songs on that wonderful album. That's what I meant to post. I posted another link that I didn't intend to. But Karen's music there's a lot of it on YouTube. You can check it out, and including that song. Just you can't fail. It's just absolutely wonderful in all of its glory.
And we have a reminder here, actually.
Can I say just thanks to you guys for doing this, because it's really, really great that you're doing these forums. I've checked out numerous ones of them, and thanks for keeping us all company and intellectually challenged during this dark time.
Easy for us.
Yes, thank you.
For you guys.
That was amazing.
Yeah. And also, just before people go, actually, you see there in the chat, there is a note there of the name of that magnificent Frank Hart collection. It's simply called At Living Voice by Terry Moylan. And you've even got a link there actually to custommusic.com, where you can actually pick up that text. And there you are. And listen, lots of questions and answers there that we haven't got around to doing. Gormagam, Kelly Dunn and Paula Deere, Agus our own, Kathy Williams and Jen, Claudia Harris, Jason McCool, and whatever else. Thank you, everybody. See you next week.